Your theory describes the world, and as far as you're concerned, your description of the world is the world. But because you're a scientist, you think, well, even though that's my description of the world and that's what I believe, there's something beyond what I believe.
So here is an apparent contradiction. He says that to a scientist, their description of the world is the world, but then immediately says that a scientist will recognize that there's more to the world than their description of it. Make that make sense. Well, this is why I think we get this strange claim about scientists presuming the ontologically transcendent. Because Peterson has claimed that a scientist's theory, to them, is the world, then when a scientist considers things that currently lie outside of their theory, they must be considering things that are not of the world, or in other words, transcendent, in the sense that they actually transcend the world. That's where I think he's getting that word from. So I said a moment ago that he's using the word transcendent just because of its religious connotations, but here's another option. Maybe he really thinks that a scientist's theory is to them the entire world, and so when they think of something outside of their theory, they're thinking of something transcendent. But that doesn't make sense either, because of course, to simply recognize that something exists outside of our current description is not to recognize the ontologically transcendent. It's just to say that there are things about nature that we currently do not know. That's it. But Peterson actually responds to my objection here as follows.
This is a very complicated topic, right? Do you believe in a transcendent reality? See, okay, now let's say you buy the argument I just made on the natural front. You say, yeah, that's just nature. That's not God.
Yes, that is pretty much what I'm saying. This world that exists outside of our current scientific description does not have to be God, does not have to be transcendent. It can just be the rest of nature that we don't yet understand.
And then I'd say, well, what makes you think you know what nature is? Like, see, the problem with that argument is that it already presumes a materialist, a reductionist, materialist, objective view of what constitutes nature.
Wait, hold on. Do you see what's just happened? Peterson says, first, that scientists believe in something outside of their current theoretical description of the world. I agree. He then says that this has to be transcendent and deistic. I say, well, hold on, why can't it just be nature? And he says, well, can you prove that? Can you prove that it's just nature? How do you even know what nature is? Well, no, I can't prove that. But I never claimed to be able to. Excuse me, but I'm not the one claiming scientists have to be materialists. You're the one claiming that they have to be deistic. You're the one making the claim, not me. If I made the claim that scientists have to presuppose naturalism, then yes, I'd need to give some evidence for this. But I'm not making that claim. You're making the claim that belief in something outside of our current theories has to be, for some reason, transcendent and deistic, and can't just be natural. You're the one who has to back that up. So, the first mistake that I think Peterson makes on this science and religion stuff is to confuse facts that are not currently encompassed by our scientific description of the world with ontologically transcendent truths. But then he also, as a second step, and basically with no justification, claims that these transcendent truths have to be deistic in nature.
What's the precondition for being a scientist? And I thought, well, in some sense, it's a there's deistic preconditions.
Where the hell did that bit come from? Well, for all my searching, this is the best explanation that I can find from Peterson.
So as a scientist, you have to posit the existence of the ontological transcendent before you can move forward at all. But more, you have to posit that contact with the ontological transcendent, annoying though it is because it upsets your apple cart, is exactly what will in fact set you free. So then you accept the proposition that there is a transcendent reality, and that contact with that transcendent reality is redemptive in the most fundamental sense, because if it wasn't, well, why would you bother making contact with it? You're going to make everything worse or better?
Right, so Peterson is clarifying that in order to do science, a scientist must be motivated. They must somehow think that by discovering new truths, they're achieving some good or doing something worthwhile. Of course, this is true in a sense. In order to do anything, we need a motivation to do it. But Peterson insists that a scientist's motivation has to be that they'll be set free by it, and that this will be redemptive. Why would he choose these terms? Again, like transcendent, I think that he's purposefully using religiously charged language to make his quite straightforward observation seem like it has religious significance, where it in fact does not. One of the most famous passages from the Gospel of John is John 8:32. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And of course, redemption is the key project of the New Testament. So Peterson is using words that play on Christian themes, but as I say, I think he's doing this unjustifiably. For example, why does a scientist have to believe that science will set them free? Well, this is something that Lex Friedman actually asks.
Why does the contact with the transcendent set you free as a scientist?
Because you assume, I mean, freedom in the most fundamental sense. It's like, well, freedom from want, freedom from disease, freedom from ignorance, right? That it informs you.
But do you see how this is a bit ridiculous? Peterson just said that it's because a scientist thinks that science will set us free from ignorance or inform us.
Freedom from ignorance, right? That it informs you.
But what a strange way to phrase it. Instead of saying that a scientist thinks that science will inform us or increase our knowledge or something like that, Peterson insists that science will set us free from ignorance. There's nothing strictly wrong with using this phrasing. It's a bit more poetic and pretty. But here it's clearly being used in such a way as to suggest that science is religious in nature by making a not-so-subtle nod to the Bible. Same thing with redemptive.
Redemptive in the most fundamental sense, because if it wasn't, well, why would you bother making contact with it? You're going to make everything worse or better?
Sure, science can increase our well-being by curing diseases and the like, but the word redemptive seems like it's been chosen to inject religious imagery. And if you don't believe me, just think about it for a second. Imagine that I were on a road trip, and I were reading a map, and that map told me where to exit the highway. And then I claimed that because this map informed me of something that I didn't already know, the map didn't just inform me or help me direct my car, no. The map set me free from my ignorance after I contacted the ontologically transcendent, that is, the directions that were outside of my knowledge, and this has been redemptive in the sense that it's made things better for me. I'm now going in the right direction. That's right, reading a map has deistic preconditions.
Deistic preconditions.
Because to read a map, you have to believe that there exists the ontologically transcendent, that which is outside of your current description of the world. And you have to believe that by engaging with it, you set yourself free in a way that's redemptive. That's the idea that you're being sold here. I really hope that you can see through it now. The thing that Peterson is actually describing when he talks about how science works is about as straightforward and banal as my description of how a map works. But just by dressing it up in this religious imagery, he makes it sound a lot more profound than it actually is, if you're not listening carefully. And not only does he make it sound more profound, he makes it sound more religious. So just like when he describes fictional stories in the Bible as meta-truths, he's allowing himself to sound like he's committing himself to quite profound, spiritual, supernatural, and religious claims without actually doing anything of the kind. All of this serves to obscure a truly straightforward and ordinary secular observation about how science works behind a wall of religious imagery, which, intentionally or not, is vastly misleading. I mean, let's put this argument first in Jordan Peterson's own terms, and then in more straightforward language. Jordan Peterson has given an argument that scientists must assume a transcendent deistic reality. And that's because a scientist must believe in a transcendent realm outside of the world, contact with which is redemptive and sets us free. Now let's hear the same thing without the poetic terminology and without confusing a scientist's description of the world for the world. Peterson argues that scientists must believe in truths not currently captured by our scientific description of the world, and that uncovering these truths will make us less ignorant and sometimes allow us to improve our welfare, such as in medical research. That's it. That is what he's argued. And somehow this leads to deism? I just don't see it. This is why I think you have to be duly cautious when dealing with Jordan Peterson. By subtly playing around with definitions, and by using terms that aren't always strictly inaccurate, but in highly unusual contexts, he can begin making bizarre claims, like you can't be secular in a museum.
Are you looking at art? Yes. Well, what makes you think you're secular then?
Or scientists have to presuppose deism.
There's deistic preconditions.
Or the Exodus is still happening.
They happened in a meta manner. They're still happening.
I think that a good summary of where it is that Peterson goes wrong when talking about religion can be found in the following clip, in which he considers whether the Christian logos, that is, Jesus himself, is divine.
The divinity of Christ. Well, I would say the same problems with the question formulation obtain. What do you mean by divine? And also, what do you mean by Christ? These are very, very difficult questions. Now, I believe that, for all intents and purposes, I believe that the Logos is divine. Insofar as if by divine you mean of ultimate value, of ultimate transcendent value, yes, it's divine.
But who does mean that by divine? I mean, seriously, when somebody asks if Jesus is divine, they're clearly asking if he is God, or at least God-like. By simply redefining divine to mean something more convenient and more secular, Peterson can then say that the Logos is divine. But he's simply now talking about something completely different, and something that isn't even supernatural anymore. In conclusion, I think that we should stop allowing Jordan Peterson to get away with a vagueness of language that we wouldn't accept in any other context. He's so loose with definitions and meanings when talking about religion that, as Muhammad Hijab points out, he begins to sound like a postmodernist.
When I was reading your book, you were talking about some psychological theory, which I don't forget. I forget what it is right now. But you mentioned something. You said there's, the problem with this such and such theory is that it doesn't have any evidence. Full stop. Categorical. All this, what you're doing now, you didn't mention that. You didn't say, well, it depends on what you mean by this, it depends on what you... Sorry to say, Yani. But it depends on what you mean by this, it depends on what you mean... You become postmodern all of a sudden.
I mean, just listen here to Peterson asking, does God exist?
People say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say, as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean.
You become postmodern all of a sudden.
Just imagine that he was being asked about literally any other context. Say, Dr. Peterson, do you believe that George Washington crossed the Delaware River in 1776?
Okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean
George Washington?
And you say, as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean. We don't really know what any of those things mean.
In any other context, we would accuse Peterson of purposefully obfuscating the question in order to avoid giving a straight answer. Is that what he's doing here? Well, that would depend on what you mean by is, and that, and doing. But yes, probably, yeah.